Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 203, The Mehegan Brothers. In the Adelaide Observer on the 14th of October 1916, there was an article titled Long Lost Brother Found. Two brothers from Australia have just met under romantic circumstances. In 1898, Jack Mehegan, brother of Hughie Mehegan, the one-time Australian champion lightweight boxer, ran away after a quarrel with his younger brother and had not since been heard of. Recently, Jack Mehegan arrived in England with some Australian troops and was sent to a camp where his brother Hughie was, and the two thus met for the first time for many years. Hughie and Jack's parents were Robert Mehegan, who was born in 1849 in Melbourne, and his parents were Irish and had immigrated to Melbourne in January 1842. Robert Mehegan died in 1915 in Melbourne. Their mother, Mary Ann Roach, was born on the 8th of December 1856 in Gisborne, Victoria. Mary's father was English and her mother Irish. Robert Mehegan and Mary Ann Roach married in Melbourne in September 1853. Mary died in August 1924 in East Melbourne. Robert and Mary had 10 children, 7 of whom survived infancy. And on the 1st of December 1917, in the Launceston Daily Telegraph, it says, Trooper Jack Mehegan, brother of Hughie Mehegan, writes in a graphic way from Salisbury Plain of the way Australian soldiers in training there received news of the death of Les Darcy. The men were paraded in full dress, and a tall, dark, middle-aged padre, Reverend Father C. O'Donnell, moved forward and in sad tones said, "We have called you together to show our deepest sympathy to one of our own flesh and blood, one of our own brave Australian boys who have passed away in the form of Les Darcy. He died not a slacker but a hero from a complaint in the tonsils. But many of your troops like myself believe he died from a broken heart. The troops thought they had been called up to go to the front, and the brightness of their faces, caused by such prospects, changed to looks of sadness when the news was read out." Jack was born Austin James Mehegan in 1881 in St Kilda. He was the fourth born in the family. He married Sarah Nora Collins in 1904, and they had 2 sons, John and Albert. In 1912, they were living in Flemington, Victoria, and Jack was a driver. Jack enlisted in World War I in January 1915 and embarked from Australia in June 1916 and was stationed in France. He stated his occupation was a professional athlete. Jack received a military medal in October 1918 and another one on the 11th of February 1919. On the 26th of July 1919, there was a letter written to his wife saying, "I have much pleasure in forwarding hereunder the copy of the extract from the 5th supplement to the London Gazette dated the 11th of February 1919, relating to the conspicuous services rendered by Sergeant A.J. Mehegan, a member of the Australian Imperial Force. He was awarded the Military Medal. His Majesty the King has been graciously pleased to approve of the award of the Military Medal for the bravery in the field to Number 7 Sergeant A.J. Mehegan." On the 4th of October 1919, from Sergeant A.J. Mehegan, care of Mrs. Mehegan of 34 Clifton Street in Flemington. "Dear Sir, I am directed to transit herewith the congratulatory cards issued by the officer commanding in the 3rd Australian Division, referring to laudatory terms to the conspicuous manner in which you conducted yourself on the battlefield in the face of the enemy. Yours faithfully, Major from Officer of Base Records." Jack was discharged in July 1919 and he died on the 10th of December 1952 at the age of 71. Eugene Daly Mehegan, known as Hughie, was born on the 26th of August 1886 in North Melbourne. He was the 6th born in the family. He married Minnie Maud Hudswell in 1908 in Victoria. Minnie wrote some reflections about her husband and how they met and their early married life. And it says, "I wonder how many marriages come about through a girl falling in love with her girlfriend's brother or a boy going dippy about his pal's sister. Before I reached my majority, I was married to my girlfriend's brother to become Mrs. Eugene Daly Mehegan. Few of his closest friends would have known him as E.D. Mehegan. When I first met Hugh, he worked at a West Melbourne bond store with his father. For a time I protested that I wouldn't like to be married to a man who was always displaying black eyes and a bent nose. Hugh said he'd show me that a boy could win fights without getting marked. I often wonder if I was responsible for his adopting the guard that became known as the Hugh Mehegan smother. He came home from his first tournament bouts without the slightest sign of having taken punishment. A fight with the kids was as harmless as a game of rounders, he told me. Later on I became aware that his opponents didn't think so. As Hugh's father thought it was a manly sport, and Hugh had promised that he would always play the game and not drink if he were allowed to box, I waived my objections. As time wore on, we, the family and I, all became to regard him as a little hero. He won his first 5 professional fights with knockouts. Ranji Moody was floored for 8 in the first round and had to give in the second round with a damaged head and hand. Although 6 pounds lighter, Hugh made Dave Courtney call a halt to the 16th round. When Bob Bryant returned to Sydney and reported on his fight with Hugh, he interested Sydney promoters, and an offer came to Hugh for a match against Bob Turner, ex-lightweight champion of Australia. It was the biggest thrill of Hugh's career to that time to be invited to go to Sydney to fight. It was not long before we had enough for us to buy a home and get married, he informed me. Hughie and Minnie had a daughter, Irene Maud, on the 18th of December 1910 in Ascot Vale in Victoria. In the Melbourne Age on the 24th of December 1910, Mehegan, née Hudswell, on the 18th of December at Maudville in Ulster Street, Ascot Vale, wife of Hughie Mehegan, a daughter, both well. Irene went on to be engaged to Mr. Frederick Jules Varcots, which was outlined in the Table Talk of Melbourne on the 2nd of January 1930. And it states that Miss Irene Mehegan, only daughter of the late Hughie Eugene Mehegan and Mrs. Ellen Brown of Warunga, Croydon, to Mr. Frederick Jules Varcots, only son of Mrs. Varcots of John Street, Lilydale. However, this engagement didn't lead into marriage, as far as I can tell, as Irene married Frank Fuller Leighton on the 12th of March 1937 in Melbourne. Frank died in 1959, and then Irene went on to marry Ronald Golding Coombs on the 7th of May 1960 in Jordanville, Victoria, and Irene died on the 25th of June 1999 in Victoria at the age of 88. So getting back to Hughie and Minnie, on the 27th of September 1912 in the Sydney Stock and Station Journal in New South Wales, Hughie Mehegan. It looks like as if Hughie Mehegan will have a chance of earning enough money in England to build a shop for himself in Melbourne. Now he has got the consent of Julian Sumners to meet him for a £20 aside. Also, Mehegan is in a position to accept Matt Wells's challenge for a return match for £1,000. A Mr. John Wren of Melbourne cabled to Mehegan offering him the necessary money to cover the £100 that Wells has put up. And on 31st of January 1913 in the Sydney Stock and Station Journal, Hughie Mehegan. Hughie Mehegan, the apple of Australia's boxing eye, will soon be in Sydney. The general impression is that he will quickly vanquish Jack Reed and Herb McCoy. My opinion is that he will find both these boys tough propositions. When Hughie left this island continent to scalp boxers overseas, there was not in Australia a lightweight of the present form of Reed or McCoy to pit against him. Anyway, I think that Hughie will not beat either McCoy or Reed when he comes back. Maybe I'm wrong. On the 6th of March 1915, in the Maitland Daily Mercury, Hughie Mehegan. Hughie Mehegan is credited with having stated at a banquet after his contest with McCoy that he is the welterweight champion of Australia through having beaten Picato and Higgins. As a matter of fact, McCoy, who defeated him for the lightweight title, has really a better claim to the welterweight through having beaten Thorne, who beat Ulshots, who beat George. On the 17th of April 1915 in the Daily News in Perth, Hughie Mehegan, the Australian champion who's come to Perth to box Fred Kay, the defeater of Morey, for the Welterweight Championship of Australia at His Majesty's Theatre on Friday evening the 23rd. This contest is regarded as the most important ever to be held in this state, both men being champions and meeting for the first time. On the 30th of November 1915, in the Farmer and Settler in Sydney, it says Hughie Mehegan beaten. Mehegan and O'Connor provided the attraction at the Melbourne Stadium on Saturday night last, but the fight was of short duration. O'Connor dealt out considerable punishment and in the 7th round pasted the ex-champion so unmercifully that his seconds threw in the towel. On the 26th of May 1916 in the Maitland Daily Mercury, New South Wales, Hughie Mehegan. Before going to the front, Private Hughie Mehegan is to be seen in the ring. He will meet Eddie May in Melbourne on the 3rd of June. Hughie enlisted in World War I on the 28th of April 1916. He listed his occupation as a professional boxer and left Melbourne on the 3rd of June 1916. In the Melbourne Winner on the 20th of December 1916, Hughie Mehegan writes of his boxing in England. Driver Hughie Mehegan writes from England to the editor on the 23rd of October saying, "Just a line to let you know I am still in the land of the living. I've had 2 contests since leaving dear Australia, one with Reg Sanderson at a place called Perham Downs. I won that by a knockout in 3.5 rounds. A week later I went down to Liverpool and fought Jack Greenstock and knocked him out in 8 rounds. So you see I have got my punch back. I'm getting leave to box Johnny Summers at the National Sporting Club in November. This will be the 3rd time Johnny and myself have been matched, but none have ever come off, though it is no fault of Johnny or myself that they did not. It is to be hoped that this one will take place. I am in training in camp after we do our work. I train every night. I have plenty of sparring partners here with the boys, but I will miss 2 or 3 nights this week as we're going on our night manoeuvres in our wagons. The other night it was funny. The miners were mine practising. When the mine was let off, all our chaps were in their huts, some lying down, when all of a sudden the mine was fired. We all jumped up, grabbed our rifles and made a rush for the doors, all thinking we'd been attacked by a Zepp. We did laugh over it when we found out what it was. Remember me to all the boxing sports, and Matt Daly and Jim Winters and Mr. Lane." Hughie served in France as a driver until he was hospitalised on the 17th of November 1917. And on the 28th of November 1917, Hughie died, aged only 31, at the 53rd Casualty Clearing Station in France of nephritis and Bright's disease. The barrier miner in Broken Hill announced his death on the 3rd of February 1918. Hughie Mehegan's death. The news of Hughie Mehegan's death at the front reached Australia recently by cable. The following communication was received by Mr. Corbett of the referee from Major C. Nigel Smith of the AAMC. It is dated France, 10th of November 1917. "You may remember me as a swimmer in the Barney Kieran days. My reason for writing, however, has nothing to do with swimming. It is this. Received the final knockout administered by Bright's disease a couple of days ago at a British casualty clearing station to which I'm temporarily loaned for duty. Number 10,971, driver E.D. Mehegan, 22 AASC, better known to yourself and the big sport-loving section of the Australian public as a skillful boxer with a forcible punch. His last fight was a comparatively short one. Being a man of iron constitution, the insidious blows of his foe were not taken much notice of by him till his strength was undermined and he was practically at the mercy of that foe. The advice and help of his second, a very able physician, were not sufficient to prevent his defeat, and he rapidly took the count. Though in a British hospital, many Australian friends were close by and visited him regularly, and a large number of Australians paid him the last tribute of respect by attending his funeral. By Mehegan's death, Australia generally loses a patriotic citizen, the boxing world of a clean, sound fighter, and his wife a devoted husband. And his death was also outlined in the Christchurch Sun in New Zealand on the 15th of December 1917, Boxer and Soldier, Hughie Mehegan's career. When the full history of the ring in Australia is written, there will be an honoured place in it for Hughie Mehegan, whose death in a hospital in France was announced by cable received from Sydney last Wednesday. For Mehegan, although he did not realise the expectations of people who prophesied that he would become a champion of the world, shed a lustre upon Australian boxing. His sterling qualities as a boxer and a man won him many thousands of admirers. A gallant, great-hearted fighter, a foeman of the highest character, was Freddie Welsh's tribute to him. A straightforward, honest, clean-living man, a good husband and father, and a respected citizen was Hughie Mehegan. He gave his life to his country. Mehegan was born in North Melbourne on the 26th of August 1886, and he was in his 32nd year at the time of his death. His first appearances in the ring were in the 9-stone competition in North Melbourne and in one of Wren's 9-stone 4-pound competitions. On each occasion he was successful. At 19 he had a number of successes. He demonstrated that he had a knockout punch by winning 14 of his first 20 fights by those means. Those victories happened in 1905, 1906 and 1907. Before 1907 was half through, Mehegan had clearly proved his right to matches with the best lightweights in Australia. Matched with clever Bob Turner, he drew with the ex-champion in 20 rounds. At that time, Frank Thorne was featherweight champion of Australia and was also challenging Hock Keys for the lightweight title. Before meeting Keys, Thorne won from Mehegan on points in 20 rounds and again in 22 rounds. Then Hughie had a contest with the champion but lost again on points in 20 rounds. However, he stopped Ned Murphy in 7 rounds. Thorne lost his first contest with Keys but gained some consolation by again beating Mehegan twice in the first half of 1908. A little later, Mehegan learnt what being knocked out was like, Arthur Douglas, ex-champion of South Africa, teaching him in 11 rounds. Mehegan was a storeman by occupation, a hard-working man, quiet and unassuming, and finding his greatest joy in home life. He was such a good worker that his position was always kept open for him when he was preparing for a contest. He had found that he could now earn good money in the ring, as well as indulge in his natural fondness for the game, and he began to take boxing even more seriously than before. Before 1908 was out, Bob Greenshields had gone down before him in 14 rounds, and Sid Sullivan had been beaten in 20 rounds. Mehegan's quest for the lightweight championship of Australia was not yet met, but he was climbing forward to the pinnacle. In the meantime, Thorne had beaten Keys, but had lost in a return match, and Lynn Truscott, now fighting in France, had taken the title from Keys. Mehegan had won from Rudolf Uhlholz, the Nuggety Boar, in 11 rounds, and had lost to him in 2 rounds in a second contest through one of his arms being broken. While Mehegan's arm was mending, Bob Greenshields beat Lynn Truscott for the championship and then lost it to Jack McGowan, who in turn was defeated by Tom Jones. All this happened within a few months. Mehegan re-entered the ring to knock out Bob Greenshields in 11 rounds, and 5 weeks later, Hughie became the lightweight champion of Australia by thumping Tom Jones for 13 rounds, when Jones's seconds threw in the towel. That was on the 4th of October 1909. Before that year was out, Mehegan had avenged himself on Arthur Douglas by defeating the South African twice and had disposed of McGowan. The towel was thrown in and Greenshields knocked out in 10 rounds apiece. While this was going on, the ubiquitous Frank Thorne had ceased to bother about the featherweight championship and moved up the weight classes and had become possessed of the welterweight championship. Hughie Mehegan now set his eyes too on the welter title. However, before he set out after Thorne's scalp, he met Johnny Summers afterwards, the welterweight champion of England, and was knocked out by the fair-haired, stocky Johnny on the 19th round. Mehegan consoled himself by wrestling the welterweight championship from Thorne. Mehegan had the 2 Commonwealth titles safely in his keeping now, and challenger after challenger was sent to ride about. At the end of 1910, however, Mehegan's ambition had overreached itself a little. He had entered the ring with Cyclone Johnny Thompson, a great deal heavier than himself, but he had given that hard-hitting American middleweight the best of 5 rounds. Still, that meeting did not deter Hughie from meeting another famous American middleweight, Jimmy Clabby, about 16 months later. Mehegan had 2 fights with Clabby. He lost the first on points in 20 rounds, and in the second he was knocked out in 12 rounds. Then he wisely returned in his own weight class. That was in 1912. He'd been at the very top of his form in 1911. The influx of American fighters, of note, was not without one harmful influence on boxing in Australia. That was the tendency of some of the native-born boxers, critics and spectators alike, to make too much of the Americans' methods of glove fighting. Hughie Mehegan was one of those who fell under the spell. Certainly nature had fitted him for these American methods. He had great strength for his weight, plenty of punching power, vigour and ruggedness, and he had the quick brain of a good ring general. But there was always a danger when a man has mastered in one school of boxing and deserts it, either partially or fully, for another, and he will find his efficiency less durable. The new coat wears more quickly than the one that would be on the shoulders of a man who'd begun to wear it early in life. Previously, Hughie Mehegan had considerable cleverness as a boxer, as well as effectiveness as a fighter. A piston-like left straight and snappy was as useful as a weapon to him as his right-hand body punch or his uppercut. Now, however, he was beginning to rely more on the American style. His crouch and smother had become more pronounced and he became a strong in-fighter. He adopted Clabby's loop-to-loop punch. He had never been altogether an out-fighter, but he had now accentuated his in-fighting. For this it served him well. Living for England in 1912, Mehegan beat Jack Ward, quite a good lightweight, in 20 rounds in Birmingham. Had there been 3-minute rounds instead of 2 minutes each, Ward probably would have lasted the time. And then Mehegan won in the 11th round from Matt Wells, then lightweight champion of England. About 2 months later, Freddie Welsh won the Lonsdale back from Wells. In the following month, Mehegan fought Welsh in a 20-round contest at the National Sporting Club in London. It was a great battle. Welsh, afterwards the lightweight champion of the world, won on points. Mehegan worried Welsh with his strength and his speed, and then he caught his brilliant opponent's fast left lead. But still, Welsh was too brilliant for him. The man won. I am perfectly satisfied with the verdict, was the Australian's frank admission. A little later, Mehegan had another fight with Matt Wells, but this time he was less satisfied with the referee's decision, for Wells won on points. There were many critics who thought that a draw should have been announced and that the referee allowed himself to be influenced to his prejudice against Mehegan's American crouch. Returning to Australia, where he was soon followed by Matt Wells, Mehegan knocked out Wandimir Holberg in 17 rounds, but lost on points to Wells and to Pat Brown, a clever American lightweight. Both matches were fought in Sydney. In his hometown, however, Mehegan beat both Wells and Brown. Then came the sensational Australian career of Milbourne Sailor, the hard-hitting American who puzzled many opponents by his method of fighting with his right foot and rigid hand foremost. Twice was Mehegan amongst Sailor's victims. Except for losing on a foul to A. Newhouse, Sailor had a string of victories in Australia until Fred Kay, another fighter of his own style, stopped him. Joy Welling, another good American lightweight, was beaten by Mehegan, but even in his fight with Welling, Mehegan showed that he was losing his form and was slowing down. His American style was not proving durable. Subsequently came a greater fight, and Mehegan's interest in boxing was becoming subordinated to other demands. He showed his patriotic spirit in various ways, including a gift of a motor car for Red Cross work. Later, as soon as he had completed family arrangements, he enlisted, and in his new fight he showed that, as ever, he was a trier. He was a gallant, true-hearted Australian. Fortunately, his family is fairly well provided for because he was never a spendthrift, and his earnings from the ring went into real property. But he was a man of such sterling character that his loss must be keenly felt. And in the Sydney Referee on the 19th of December 1917, Hughie Mehegan, boxer, soldier. Victoria's boxing idol, Hughie Mehegan, entered the greater beyond on the 2nd of November, but it was not until last week that the news filtered through to his relatives in Melbourne. No more popular boxer ever drew on the glove in a Victorian ring than Hughie. Never at any stage in his career could he be accused of contracting that catchy complaint, swelled head, and from the start of his career until he enlisted he was the same happy-go-lucky, devil-may-care, mercurial little individual we always knew. Hughie always impressed me as a happy, overgrown schoolboy who would rather be enjoying himself with the young lads than behaving like a rational adult. Not long back I remember seeing him at Flemington on Cup Day, and at the conclusion of the day's sport he had to own up that he had never seen a race. For, as he put it, I was having the time of my life with some lads at the Love in a Tub dart and some other games. That was Hughie Mehegan all over. He never at any time had the business head of McCoy. I will admit that he tried on dabbling in property, but he overbought and was too generous and trusting as a bookmaker, while several motor deals that he was interested in were not a success. Mehegan entered the ring by accident. On the 25th of August 1905 in the North Melbourne Pastime Club, they were having a special boxing night and Bill Squires was a referee. According to Mehegan, he was just crazy on boxing, but his parents were pillars of the church and had decided objections, so that he was forced to make a getaway over the back fence. On arriving outside the hall, he with some other youths managed to work their way in, and when it was announced that the opponent for the South African, Tim Helt, had failed to put in an appearance, Mehegan was influenced by his mates to go in and have a fly. He did, and made a real good show, even though he shaped 1 minute with his right foot forward and the next with his left. Unknown to his parents, he secretly trained under Fred Preston, and the first inkling that they had that there was a boxer in the family was when he afterwards entered and won a tournament at the North Melbourne Club, the first prize being a gold medal. After this, he met Dave Gallagher in the preliminaries to the Bill Squires Tim Murphy and Bill Squires Peter Kling contests, winning on each occasion. Mehegan afterwards joined Tom Boyle's gym. He informed me that this move was made from Preston to Boyle merely because he desired sparring experience with Ed Williams and not because he had anything against his old instructor. His performances from then on are too well known to need repetition. He fought men of all sizes and weights and dodged a knockout until he met South African Arthur Douglas, but he avenged that defeat later on. On the 19th of November 1909, Mehegan won the lightweight championship title from Jack McGowan and held it until he met Herb McCoy on the 27th of February 1915. From then on, poor old Hughie was on the toboggan down. He was always a clean liver, and the only reasons I can attribute for his rapid loss of form are that the heavy punishment he repeatedly had taken in the head was now beginning to tell, while on the top of this, he was a heavy cigarette smoker. He never recovered his best form after this, as it will be realised when it was remembered that he put up great contests with such celebrities as Freddie Welsh, Matt Wells, Pal Brown, Jimmy Clabby, Charlie Griffin, Frank Thorne and Herb McCoy, yet at the finish went under to Ferdinand Quandro, Kid George and Frank O'Connor. When Mehegan enlisted and was with the troops in England, he had 3 contests, beating Jack Greenstock in 8 rounds, but then being knocked out by both Johnny Summers and Kid Boyle. No doubt after a great fighting career, Hughie would have preferred to die with his boots on facing the foe, but such was not to be, and this model little sportsman, good husband and fond father, breathed his last in a hospital after being a brave little sufferer from a kidney complaint. Mrs. Mehegan and his daughter Irene can rest assured that Australian sportsmen, in fact sports all over the world, sympathise with them in their sad bereavement. In 2009, Hughie was inducted into the Australian Boxing Hall of Fame. Hughie's other siblings: Robert George Mehegan was born in 1877 in Hotham, Victoria, and died in 1915 in Hotham West. And it was announced in the Melbourne Herald, boxer's brother dies. Robert George Mehegan, 38, driver, brother of Hughie Mehegan, the boxer, died suddenly in bed last night at his residence in North Melbourne, the cause of death, heart disease. Another brother was John Emmanuel Mehegan. He was born in 1878 in Hotham. He married Gian Errol in Wagga, New South Wales in 1913 when he was 35 and Johanna 25. And John died in 1942 in Ryde, New South Wales at the age of 64. Another brother, George Roach Mehegan, was born in 1880 in Hotham, Victoria. He married Mary Honora Smith on the 23rd of July 1898 in Victoria. On July the 27th, 1918, in the Melbourne Weekly Times, there's an article titled "Boxer's Brother Divorced, Misconduct Alleged." Mr. Justice Cusson in the Banco Court last week granted to Mary Honora Mehegan, 36, of Grattan Street, Carlton, boarding house keeper, a decree nisi for the dissolution of her marriage with George Roach Mehegan, 38, galvaniser, on the grounds of alleged repeated misconduct with Elsie Margaret Thompson at Croydon between June 1914 and June 1918. The marriage took place in July 1898, and there are 3 sons aged 19, 17 and 15. The petitioner said that Mehegan supported her until 1912 when he went to England as manager for his brother, who was a professional boxer. During the 18 months he was in England, she frequently received letters from him but no money. On his return from England, he went to Sydney, and when he returned from there, he did not come to see her or give her money. She has not seen the respondent since March 1917. Mehegan had repeatedly misconducted himself with Elsie Margaret Thompson at Croydon, and he was the father of a child born to her in September 1917. She'd heard that he had a house at Croydon, and Elsie Margaret Thompson was living there. The petitioner was given custody of the children. George ended up having 5 children with Elsie from 1915 to 1924. He married Elsie in 1920 in Glebe, New South Wales, and George died in 1941 in Melbourne at the age of 61. And he had 2 sisters as well, Daisy Elizabeth Mehegan, who was born on the 5th of July 1891 in Hotham. Daisy married James William Bradbury, known as Sonny, in 1910 in Victoria, and they had 7 children. And in 1945, James died in Lithgow, New South Wales, and his death notice says, "Death of ex-councillor James Bradbury. We regret to announce the death of ex-councillor James Bradbury at Lithgow Hospital. He leaves a widow and 5 children, all of whom are well known in Frankston. His son Keith was killed some time ago while serving in the Air Force. Both Hugh and Bevan are still in the services. Mr. Bradbury represented Mount Eliza in the Frankston and Hastings Council for some years and was the owner of the Fernry." And Daisy died on the 12th of May 1947 in Lithgow at the age of 55. And the last sibling was Frances Mehegan. She was born in 1897 in Victoria, and she married William Edward Court in 1916 in Victoria. William was a carpenter, and Frances died in 1983 in Williamstown, Victoria, at the age of 86. So I hope you enjoyed listening to the story of the Mehegan family, in particular Hughie and his successors as a boxer in Australia, who by all accounts seem to be very well regarded.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.